So thank you very, very much. We have time for 2 or 3 very quick questions, and I will ask the speakers to support me on this. I would like to start with Harry in the beginning, and Harry spoke a lot about the cost of this problem with COVID. COVID has accelerated a number of changes, and we saw that it's a domino effect. So we know there's a big issue with what's going on, and we haven't seen the consequences yet. But please, I would like your view on the cost of, has the World Bank made any estimation, if possible? There are some questions on this, on the cost of changing to technology, the infrastructure of schools. Do you think that's going to happen? Is that something that is the next step? And is there any financial estimation on this?
Thank you. Very good question. We don't have a global number, but I wanted to share a few things. One is our dialogue pre-COVID in Europe and Central Asia was about education reform, higher education. It has since changed to the fundamentals of education, the online system during the emergency, the building of a technological response for future pandemics, and also for strengthening the education system. But we're also seeing a renewed interest in school infrastructure. Safety of schools primarily. There are still schools in Europe and Central Asia that don't have sanitary facilities. 21st century Europe, and we still have schools that are not prepared. So it's very difficult to say, look at the example of Norway and Germany. They opened successfully, but they have the safety and sanitary minimum requirements. But also, what kind of learning environment? There was already discussions about the learning environment, how it contributes to learning. This has become even more pronounced. That is probably the number one request that we're getting now is, what do we do about the learning environment? I think in terms of the costs of responding, at the very least, we need to maintain the education spending. There'll be a lot of pressure in countries to reduce expenditures. What I've noticed in the last few months is that the high-performing education systems have actually announced increases to their education spending, whereas some of the middle-income countries are struggling to even maintain the education budget. It's imperative that fundamental spending remains, and then targeted interventions to improve the learning environment, the technological response, and of course the learning recovery, but in a way that will fundamentally change and reform systems so they become resilient and able to absorb some of these future shocks, but also build the kind of educated citizenry countries want.
I think one of the reasons, as you know, Harry, that we did this is to stress the issue of this gap. And yourself, Nicholas, and Joyce did stress that, and Stelios provided some of the solutions. So, I think it was interesting to see that. And I think you would all agree that it's a good opportunity. Every crisis has opportunities. I think now is the time for people to stress that, we need the funding and, things need to be done. I think people are listening now. So let me go to the second question. What would you do to increase? Is there anything going on around the world that, can help? Did you believe in going from the educator, from that part to solve the problem of inequality? How important is that? You did mention that, and I think people want to listen a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't solve systemic issues in education without teachers. They are the most fundamental component of any education system, and I think it's something that tends to get overlooked a little bit from time to time, is that these are real people doing very, very hard jobs at the best of times that would exhaust us, that we couldn't do. And they're now being asked to do it in the middle of a pandemic. Before the pandemic hit, I mean, if you look at the OECD's last available data, even in the richest countries, like over half of teachers said that they didn't feel prepared to use technology in their pedagogy.
So, and that would be, Nicholas, if I can just stop you there, that would be a huge investment on its own, right? I mean, how to change that mindset and the new toolkit, correct?
Absolutely. So I think that they went in without the tools needed to teach in this pandemic. We have a network of world-class teachers around the world. Their morale has been hit very, very hard by this pandemic. And I think one of the things that we've talked about today is this sense of community, that school and teachers have this sense of community that keeps everyone going through the worst. and that's been fractured, and kids have been cut off from the classroom and teachers have been cut off from other teachers. What I will say to speak to your point is that teachers around the world are doing extraordinary things for their students, and we've seen, as we saw in my presentation, teachers working in very remote areas or areas affected by conflict, or areas where there's a huge amount of poverty. It really speaks to strength of character and things that can't be easily measured, that they are the ones who are coming up with the solutions, despite the lack of technology, despite the lack of assistance from government. It's teachers being incredible teachers which is going to get us through this pandemic, and it's teachers who are helping each other through this pandemic. And I think that's something that's important to stress as well, is that teachers are coming through from each other. I think one thing we also lose sight of is how much teachers are doing beyond the pedagogy. Actually, we've heard testimonies of teachers delivering food to their students and of serving their communities and of being that vital link at the heart of communities that connects so many different strands, business and parents and politicians, all of them at that nexus. At the heart of the school, there's a teacher. So I think all of society really needs to do the best they can to support teachers. Now, I'm conscious I don't have much time, but what I'll say is this goes beyond policy. Governments are not very good at boosting morale, and maybe that's a good thing, because if governments could change the way people feel about things, that would be a little worrying. This is an all of society thing. Now, in the UK and in many other countries, what we used to do was to go out and applaud our teachers, applaud our doctors every week, and applaud paramedics and their contribution during the pandemic. It would be wonderful if our society could recognize the invaluable contribution that teachers have made during these very difficult months. And I think that's something that needs to come organically from society rather than from government.
Very good points. Thank you, Nicholas, and very inspirational things for educators. So thank you very much on behalf of everyone. One more question to Joyce. And you've been getting a lot of questions and comments from around the world, because I guess Microsoft has been in the forefront and Teams has been used extensively. And I think it's a great tool to help all of us as educators. Two things, though. One is you talked a lot about not a lot, but you did mention the analytics part. You're measuring things. And I think, data is very important. How is that going to help the one-to-one, the personalized education? And one crazy question for me, maybe Microsoft University soon?
So couple of points around that. I think first of all, Insights, it's in preview right now. You can get that already as an educator if you set up the preview. And Classroom Insights is a really powerful tool to understand what's going on with your students' learning. So you can get insight like, to what extent students have looked at different learning activities, how long they've spent on them, completion rates across your class, so you can understand, how easy or not it was to actually do a piece of homework or an activity that's been assigned. So that's kind of the functional pieces which help you to just see, have students been able to progress through a learning activity in a set of processes that you've put in place as a teacher. But there's also a lot of insight in there that you can gain in terms of student habit and behavior. So for instance, you'll be able to see that some students are consistently working very early in the morning, or some students are consistently working very late at night. And that can help you reach out to those students and say, hey, have you got something going on in the daytime that's preventing you from doing your schoolwork during the day? Is there something going on from a family perspective that you need some help with? And so I think one of the core parts of the way that we're building our insights tools is that we want to focus on how we can actually educate the educators and school leaders in using these tools in ways which are not punitive, but that they are tools not for command and control, but for better targeting to support the students who really need it according to what's going on in their lives. So I think that's one really key point. The other thing which is fascinating in some research that we did prior to the COVID pandemic was that we found, by analysing the behaviour of students on Office 365 that we did in a school district in the US, those students who collaborated more with their peers were those students who had higher learning gains in the different subject areas in which that collaboration was taking place. So there are some kind of key factors which we can point to from the data that's generated, which show consistent learning gains for any type of student. And I think that type of insight is also really useful. Microsoft University, great question. I think Well, we already have Microsoft Learn, which is our platform for getting all kinds of technical training, which was an internal tool that we've made available to the whole world. So that's out there already. I think we are making more and more tools available for universities and for ministries of education to make available national learning platforms. We've got a national IT fitness platform in Germany, for instance, and I'm seeing more and more of these types of platforms being rolled up in partnership with governments around the world. So maybe not called the Microsoft University per se, but watch this space.
Thank you very, very much. Amazing work. And I think data, of course, will give us a lot of answers going forward for one-to-one.